Hello everyone, we are Communicare Substance Abuse Prevention Services. We go out in the community and school systems throughout 6 counties and educate individuals like you on the awareness of drugs and alcohol. Prevention teams throughout several regions are finding ways to keep our children safe while learning from home. Over the next several weeks and or months, we would like for you to join us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube for a spring online learning series. We will be discussing facts, data, and ways to prevent substance use.
Hi everybody, my name is Charles Dingus and that was my supervisor Miss Shanterrica Pegues, and together with our other prevention specialist Miss kcard, we have put together this presentation for all you people at home that are not able to join in on any of our classes in person. Now of course if you're joining us through quarantine, we wish that this was under different circumstances. Now in this presentation we are going to go over alcohol and nicotine prevention. We have to break this up into 2 separate videos because the first time that we did it all in one take, well, it took a little bit too much time to upload. So that being said, we'll go ahead and get started, and today's video will be on alcohol and the next will be on nicotine. So we have 2 highly addictive substances in alcohol and nicotine, which is funny because they are both still totally legal depending on your age. Now, they're both seen together and separate pretty frequently. Now, the reason that they're seen together is because, of course, people drink and smoke at the same time, whether at a party or at a bar. But then they're also seen separate because not everyone who drinks smokes, and vice versa. Now, another thing that we know is that the younger you are, the worse they are for your brain development. And this is pretty clear because we know that they stunt brain development, especially when you're a minor. Now at the bottom we've included a link to our Refuse, Remove, Reasons curriculum website. Now we will include a link to this website in the description, so please feel free to use that whenever the video is over. Now, in the overview, we include things that you can anticipate throughout this presentation. In the alcohol portion, which will be on this video exclusively, we talk about a brief history of alcohol, and I like to keep the history of alcohol brief just because there's a lot of ways that we could get bogged down, and it kind of distracts from the actual focus. Now, we move from the brief history of alcohol to how alcohol affects your body. Yes, there are a lot of very negative ways that alcohol affects your body. As soon as it touches your lips, you are at higher risk for lots of things like cancers and heart disease and problems with your organ functioning. And so we have to be really careful in how we understand the effects. And then that actually brings us to the alcohol and the law. Yes, there are a lot of laws that include alcohol use, and those are really important, and it's important for us to follow those because they can be very expensive and very deadly if we disobey them. And then we also move on to alcohol standards. What do we mean when we say standards? Well, we mean how much is one drink of alcohol. Now, we also have on the overview the tobacco and nicotine portions, but the truth is that will be on the next video, so stay tuned if you need to know more about that. But let's move ahead. Now, the history of alcohol actually goes back a really long time, and I'm not able to include every bit of information here, which is why we keep it so brief. But we call it prehistoric because there is no real evidence of when it was first created. Most historians actually agree that it was probably discovered by accident when someone left some grain, fruit, and or honey in the bottom of a covered vessel for an extended period of time, which sounds like a pretty easy mistake to make. Now, whenever that person uncovered the vessel and discovered what they had created, they probably rejoiced and shared the recipe with other members of the tribe who would share it with other tribes, who would then share it with enough people that an entire civilization of people became aware of its existence. Now, the first real historic evidence that we have of alcohol is around 7000 BC in ancient China, when an emperor was actually buried with several clay pots of what archaeologists determined was the residue of fermented rice and honey, or what we like to call mead. Now, that would make mead the oldest known existing alcohol, and it is very similar to another popular beverage in Asia known as sake. Now, from China, it moved to India, and around 3000 BC, we have ancient Sanskrit religious texts that describe sura as a religious alcohol that was used similarly to how wine is used in Christianity to symbolize the blood of Christ. Sura was a very, very potent and strong alcoholic beverage. So there are other types of religions, such as Buddhism, that actually prohibit consuming sura because it causes what they called heedlessness. And so alcohol was really popular throughout this time in parts of Asia, and through trade found its way through ancient Mesopotamia, Babylon, and ancient Greece. In fact, ancient Babylonian and Greek cultures worshipped a deity or a god of wine and good times, just to show how important alcohol was to the culture at that time. And so around 2700 BC, Greece actually began mass-producing mead and included warning labels to warn against excessive drinking, because as we know today, alcohol use does lower inhibitions, and it causes aggressive behavior in some people, as well as people who overconsume. It can be fatal. So it is very important to note that Greece considered it a public health concern that too many people were drinking too much. Now, while this is going on, while alcohol is gaining popularity throughout Europe, there's actual evidence to show that Native Americans throughout South, Latin, and North America were imbibing in a beverage known as chicha. And chicha is actually very similar to modern-day beer. It was made with fermented corn or maize, which at the time was much more just like a grain and a grass. And it was a very strong beverage, and it actually still exists today. Now, fast forward to sometime between 1500 and 1700 AD, and we have the British colonies, or the Empire of Britain. Now, around the same time as whenever America started to become a nation under the control of the British Empire. And so with that in mind, we consider the entire British Empire, that also included India and parts of Africa at the time. It was a huge undertaking to provide medicine to all the people in their territories. So Britain actually produced about 18 million gallons of grain alcohol at this time. And if you consider that, under today's standards, that might not seem like much or might seem pretty typical. But back then, that is an astronomically large amount of alcohol. And so it just goes to show how profitable this industry was. Also, how important it was to the culture at the time, especially before the age of modern medicine. Which leads us to the temperance movement of the 1870s. Now, the 1870s shortly followed the American Civil War, and it found many people using alcohol to cope with the post-traumatic stress involved with their time on the battlefield, watching loved ones and friends die right before their eyes. So, returning home from war, many of these veterans turned to alcohol to deal with their problems. The only problem is alcohol does not help people deal with their problems. So, many of the wives of these veterans and family members noticed that their sons and their husbands and their fathers were returning with aggressive problems. And so the temperance movement sought to get rid of that. So it took about 50 years, but by 1920, a year or so after the end of World War I, alcohol was completely prohibited, but it only lasted for about 13 years because of the amount of crime. So today, we have about 15 million Americans that suffer from alcoholism every day, and about 40% of all car accidents involve alcohol to some degree. which is pretty terrifying if you really give the time to think about it. So now we're going to switch things up and start talking about the effects of alcohol on your body. So I have a little quiz for you. What is the number one, quote, drug, unquote, of choice for ages below 21 in the US? What is a poison that affects every organ in your body, and that is because it's absorbed from the small intestine into the bloodstream? And it is a depressant, meaning that it not only affects your balance, but it also affects your moods, your thoughts, feelings, and actions. I'll give you some time to really consider this. So, if you guessed alcohol, you are correct. Yes, alcohol has a huge effect on your entire body. So let's look at that. So, of course, alcohol affects memory loss. Now, something that you've probably heard anytime that you hear a story or a night where someone drank way more than they probably should have, then it will probably include what they call a blackout, or an extended period of time where they have lost all memory. It's like a gap in your memory. Now, there are some people that also report what's called a brownout. Now, a brownout is whenever you lose parts of your memory where things become a little bit hazy. So think about whenever the lights flicker at home. You don't lose the entire memory, you just lose parts of the memory. It also can affect greatly depression. So if you're already somebody that suffers from depression, remember, alcohol is a depressant, meaning that it makes your body function more slowly, and it can also make you very tired, and it also slows down your motor functioning. So the depressive symptoms are the cause for the drunkenness, but it also is the culprit whenever we start to have negative thoughts and feelings when we're drinking. And so that is why it's extremely important for people that have depression to very closely monitor the amount that they drink, especially if they are on medications. So whenever someone has suicidal ideation because of their depression, usually alcohol makes that much worse. So that's why we see often whenever someone who is idealizing or thinking about committing suicide, whenever they drink, it is much, much more high risk for them to be alone, because that means that they don't have anything to hold them back. We talked before about alcohol lowering inhibitions and what is going to hold someone back who wants to commit suicide whenever no one is there to help them. Also, we talked about how addictive alcohol is. Yes, it is highly addictive because it releases different chemicals in the brain that we find pleasurable. Now, whenever we combine this substance with other types of addictive things like smoking or even food or sex, it can result in even more problematic addiction behaviors. And that's why we see people who often drink. They often have other poor decision making in choosing sexual partners. They have poor decision making whenever it comes to their diet. They probably have very poor exercise schedules or behaviors, and many of their decisions are centered around addictive behaviors rather than healthy behaviors. And then we look at our heart. So alcohol does increase high blood pressure, mostly because alcohol thins your blood. And so it deprives most of your heart from oxygen, which is something that it severely needs. So whenever your heart doesn't have enough oxygen, it has to pump faster to get a sufficient amount of oxygen so it can spread that oxygen throughout the rest of your body. Now, whenever we have high blood pressure, we can also assume that we have poor diet. And wouldn't you know it, people who drink alcohol frequently also have other poor diet behaviors. So that's why it also can very severely affect your heart and can cause things like heart failure and heart disease. But also, that is just a factor in a lot of different problems that this person probably has. Also, it can lead to throat and mouth cancer. Now, people who drink don't always smoke, so alcohol itself causing throat and mouth cancer is relatively infrequent, but they do happen together pretty often. So people who do smoke and who do drink increase the risk of developing throat and mouth cancer because they have a lowered immune system and they're exposing their throat and mouth to different carcinogens and toxins, which leads us to problems with lung infections. Yes, drinking alcohol can cause lung infections, and mostly this is because alcohol severely reduces our immune system because of how it affects our livers, how it affects our kidneys and our pancreas. Now, with lung infections because of drinking, usually this is something that is combined with smoking, but also it can cause a buildup and inflammation in our lungs, which can lead to pneumonia and different types of lung infections. And this can also lead to stroke. So problems with our lungs lead to what's called chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. So COPD is actually a leading cause of stroke because this is blockages that exist in your lungs, which can travel to your brain and cause a stroke. And this is very, very deadly and a very important part of alcohol, especially whenever you consider your lungs are separate from your digestive system. So it actually is a little bit antithetical, or it doesn't make much sense that it would hurt your lungs. But the fact is, it does. Also, this can cause breast cancer. Now, like I said, alcohol severely affects your immune system, and so cancer is something that happens whenever our white blood cells actually change their original function and start to attack the body instead of helping them like they're supposed to. And so cancer can build up in different areas throughout the body. It can become breast cancer, but also because of drinking, it can cause colon cancer, which is cancer in our large intestine, or it can cause liver cancer. And this is because alcohol is filtered through our liver, and that is how it metabolizes and goes throughout the rest of our body. It can also cause kidney disease, and this is similar to liver cancer and liver damage because the kidneys also help to filter the alcohol into our bloodstream and out of our body. And this leads us to talk about inflammation of the pancreas. And the pancreas are hugely important in our immune system because they produce different types of antibodies in order to fight infections. Well, whenever alcohol passes through the pancreas, it actually leads to damage in the pancreas, which reduces our body's ability to fight those infections. And so that's why we have a lot of different problems throughout their body. It's a combination of problems where you damage one organ, which leads to damage of another organ and another and another, and soon you have a domino effect of problems. And I also discussed throughout the brief history of alcohol that you make alcohol by fermenting sugars. So weight gain is a huge problem associated with excessive alcohol use, mostly because of the amount of sugars as well as the amount of carbohydrates that are present in alcohol. So weight gain is something that you see whenever someone has like a beer gut, or they are starting to sag in different parts of their body just because they drink more often. Now, it also is something that dehydrates your body, so it reduces the elasticity of your body. So people who drink often have wrinkles, or they have large bags under their eyes. Some people have less tone to their figure because they've drank. And so this also is a good indication of malnutrition. Of course, we need to drink water in order to stay hydrated, but whenever we drink alcohol, it does the opposite effect. Also, in sexual functioning, for men, alcohol can cause erectile dysfunction, and it can cause infertility. Actually, it causes infertility in both genders. So, infertility through alcohol consumption exists in male and female. And so that's why it's really important whenever women are planning to become pregnant. If they decide to drink, this can severely reduce the chances that they can successfully get pregnant. Also, drinking while pregnant can lead to premature birth and or a miscarriage. So, if someone is drinking while they are pregnant, it can lead to the fetus to stop growing and to effectively die from either malnutrition or alcohol poisoning. And if you begin drinking early enough in the or late enough in the pregnancy, but the alcohol does not kill the baby, then it will lead to premature birth and low birth weight, leading to potentially more infections for the child, and overall can probably kill the child. Also, it leads to deterioration of the bones because our bones also filter our blood. It's a major function of our bones to filter our blood, and so this can lead to osteoporosis if we drink too much, which is similar to the same osteoporosis in the elderly, which I think is pretty crazy to think about someone under the age of 70 having osteoporosis. Now, something else that happens is tolerance. Now, you might ask, what is tolerance? Well, tolerance is the same thing that happens if you are prescribed a medication and if you are taking it regularly over time and you realize it's not working anymore, or it's working less to a degree than it used to. And so you have to increase your dosage in order to feel the same way you did the first time you started taking medication. So tolerance in alcohol is something that happens whenever you begin drinking, and then over time, through different drinking occasions, you realize that you need to drink more in order to feel the same effects that you used to feel. So this is a huge problem because it leads to heavy drinking. Usually people develop a tolerance, and then they become even more and more tolerant, and so they have to drink more in order to feel an effect. Now, heavy drinking in men is around 15 or more drinks per week. Now, we might know somebody in our lives who drinks every evening after they get home from work, and they might drink 3 drinks every single night after work, which leads to immediately that 15 drink minimum. And then they might drink a little bit more on the weekends. And if they drink more on the weekends, then they are already in that heavy drinking realm. Now, with women, it's about half that. It's about 8 or more drinks per week. Now, the reason why is not because women are less developed than men. Now, typically, women have smaller livers than men. And the liver is the source of a very important enzyme that metabolizes or processes the liquids that we consume. Now, alcohol dehydrogenase is the enzyme that metabolizes alcohol. And it actually is much more available in men than it is in women on average. So ladies, it's really important that when you get of age that you stick to the number of drinks that you think is appropriate to drink per night and not try to keep up with other people. Same for men. Don't try to push yourself in order to drink more just because you think it's more socially acceptable. Now, for children, and that would be those people under the age of 21 and are considered legally as minors, the tolerance to alcohol is much lower in you than it is in adults. Now, adults are usually defined around the age of 25 to 27 as being biologically mature. So we decided on the age 21 for reasons unknown to me, but that is the legal age at which you can drink. So for children, alcoholic symptoms are much more intense. So people who drink alcohol under the age of 21 tend to feel the depressive effects and the drunken effects much more intensely. And so that would mean that if you already have depressive symptoms or have anxiety, then alcohol will only increase those. Also, if you have underlying conditions such as hormonal imbalances or diabetes or hypoglycemia or hyperglycemia, and typically have lower blood sugar, then drinking can lead to a spike which causes coma and death. So you have to be extremely careful, especially if you know you have these conditions, because it will not end well for you if you decide to drink and your body cannot handle it. So it is important to know what you can handle. So please wait until you are of age to drink, as well as of able body to drink, because we don't want any unintended consequences to happen on a night that's supposed to be for fun. So speaking of fun, this transitions us into the law surrounding alcohol. So we all know that the legal age to purchase alcohol in America is 21 years old. Now, some states have different laws that say that someone under the age of 21 can have alcohol purchased for them by a parent or guardian. But in Mississippi, we have passed the social host law, which says that buying alcohol for anyone under age is still illegal. So that means in a scenario where a parent might be hosting a party for their child, say it's a hotel party, and they and another parent have purchased a room in order for the child and their friends to have alcohol and not have a guardian present, that would mean that the parents who purchased that hotel room for the evening are considered responsible and liable for the welfare of the children in that room. And so they would be the social hosts in this scenario, meaning that they would be slapped with the fines and the court costs and the possible jail time if any of those children got in trouble. And so this becomes a very important thing, especially considering prom weekends and different dance parties or any kind of party where a parent might consider buying alcohol for their child. If their child is under the age of 21, then that parent is responsible for that person. And so this has become a huge hotbed of issues in Mississippi where parents are not aware of the law, and so they get slapped with a fine thinking that they were going to get off scot-free, when that is not the case. You can definitely still get in trouble if you're trying to just show your kid a good time. And so a way that we test blood alcohol concentration, which is BAC, is by measuring the amount of alcohol in blood, breath, or urine. Most commonly, we see this in field sobriety tests, which you might have seen represented in different movies or online, and this usually comes with a whole bunch of other tests to measure if someone has severely impaired coordination and are capable of driving. And another type of scenario where you might see a BAC test is in an interview for a job. It's a very common thing for different organizations to mandate regular drug screenings to make sure that their candidates for the job are capable of handling the job and are not impaired while on the job. So I'm going to show you a representation of a blood alcohol concentration chart. Now, normally these change from person to person. the only determinants are usually the size and the gender of the person, and size being measured in body weight. And on this chart, this actually should include everyone on a range of 100 to 240 pounds. So as you can see, across the top we have our weight in pounds, and on the left-hand side we see the number of drinks as well as the gender of the person drinking. Now, these are determined in 40-minute increments. So if you were to have one drink in 40 minutes and you are a 160-pound female, then your blood alcohol concentration will be 0.04. Now, if you are over the age of 21, this is under the legal driving limit. So you would be free to go if stopped and you blew a 0.04. But if you are under the age of 21, this would be 2 points over the legal driving limit for a minor. That's right, in Mississippi, it actually is a legal driving limit not of 0, but of 0.02%. And so it's important to be very aware of how intoxicated you feel, but also how intoxicated you really are, because you never know whenever you have developed a tolerance and you are deciding to drive yourself home and you go through a roadblock. And regardless of the fact if you feel fine or not, if you're under the age of 21, it's much more likely that you're over the limit to drive. And if you are over the age of 21 and you decide to drive and you are a frequent drinker, you have no way of being sure that you are below the legal driving limit. So it's always best to make sure that you make arrangements to get home safely with someone that you trust. So call an Uber, call a taxi, call your friends or call your parents or guardians. Usually these people will do whatever they can to make sure that you get home safely. And if you're afraid that you're going to get in trouble for drinking with your parents, I promise that you would get in even more trouble if they found you in jail or if you were in a very serious accident. So please do the right thing. If you decide that you want to drink while you're underage, it's important that you know the law, it's important that you know how much you've had to drink, and it's important to know how much you can take. But also, don't put yourself into situations that are dangerous, because the more that we drink, the more likely we are to put ourselves in dangerous situations. So it's important to know yourself, and it's important to know exactly who you can trust, especially in these situations whenever you are inebriated and at much higher risk to be in a bad situation. Now, I don't want to say that drinking is always a problem. Of course, we can drink and have a good time, especially if we are with people that we trust and love and we don't do it too often. It's really important to drink in moderation. And that's why in this next slide, I go over the different types of alcoholic beverages and the amount of alcohol each one contains, because it's important to know how much you're drinking when you're drinking. So, one standard drink equals about 14 grams of pure grain alcohol. In one serving of beer, that would be about 12 ounces, or a can of Budweiser, Miller Lite, or Michelob Ultra. So that would be about 5% alcohol by volume. Now, beer does come in different sizes. So if we were to purchase a 16-ounce can of beer, that would be 1 1/3 serving of beer. If we were to purchase a 24-ounce can of beer, that would be 2 servings of beer, and so on and so forth. So with an 8-ounce serving of malt liquor, that's actually more like 7% alcohol by volume. And malt liquor is actually White Claw, or Truly, or Mike's Hard Lemonade, Smirnoff Ice. These are things that you can find in the beer section in a gas station that does not otherwise serve liquor. Now for a standard serving of wine, that would be 5 ounces. Several people will overpour and give themselves more than a single serving. And then with a single serving of liquor, that is a shot. So that would be your whiskeys, vodkas, and gin. So let's look at that in this pictogram. All right, so we have our single serving of beer, and then that is just a can of beer. We have a single serving of malt liquor, which looks pretty standard. And then we have a single glass of wine, and then we have a shot poured over ice in a rocks glass with a shot glass sitting right next to it. Seems pretty simple, right? So that actually wraps things up for us for today. I appreciate everybody tuning in, and next week we will have the second portion of this video dedicated to nicotine prevention. And yes, that includes cigarette smoking, smokeless tobacco, as well as vaporizers and popular vape pens on the market today. I appreciate everybody tuning in, and hopefully next week we will be able to post the video at the regularly scheduled time at noon on Monday. So please remember that until then, practice good quarantine hygiene. Please wash your hands. Don't touch your face if you can help it. Try to maintain social distancing of about 6 feet between you and another person if you have not been quarantined with them. And above all, practice good prevention. Until next time, for the rest of the prevention team, please take care.